my confidence was that I could be what I wanted. I could take a position in accordance with what I felt was the right thing to do, and to be prepared to suffer the consequences of that.
Today marks an exciting beginning of a series of conversations about transcending boundaries. On this episode, I have the immense honor of hosting a trailblazer, a beacon of resilience, a global icon of leadership and empowerment. Today, beyond her presidency, she continues to inspire, to advocate for democracy, development, and gender equality. Her story is one of courage, determination, dedication to justice and equality. She is none other than Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first democratically elected female head of state in Africa. It's an absolute honor to have you. You've had an extraordinary life. It's a life of leadership and really transcending all kinds of boundaries. And you are so admired and beloved across the world. I'd love to start learning more about your story by starting at the very beginning with your family. I know that your father was a lawyer and he was the first indigenous Liberian to sit in the national legislature. Your mom came from two communities. It's part German, part Kru. And I wondered what kind of boundaries that broke for you, growing up in a multicultural household, and how that's influenced your outlook on life and influenced your leadership.
Thank you, Reeta. Let me say how honored I am also for the opportunity for this exchange. Let me start this way. I was the third and second girl child of my parents. What that meant is I didn't get the attention of the first two. So I had to find my own way to get attention. So I did things that everyone said, little girls shouldn't do that. I climbed trees. I sought where there were open fields in our community and went there to play football. I did all those things. Maybe those strengthened my character to say, I can still get attention from people if I do those things, that may not be the things that they really want to see. But anyway, let's go back to your issue. The research you did about my father, my mother, so correct. Indeed, my father was an indigenous from the Gola tribe, and my mother was born in one of the counties, one of the rural counties, to an indigenous mother, Kru, with a German father who was a merchant in the country at the time. I'm pleased that throughout my early years, both my mother and father never forgot their roots. And even though both of my grandmothers were illiterate, had never been to school, did not know how to write, but because the family was together and because my mother and father believed that they could be and give credit to our system at that time, that young children could be adopted by families of the elites. That's where the education of my parents come in that they both were taken into the homes of those that were called Americo-Liberians, those that returned on emancipation and founded the country So they were taken in by families. That's how my father became a lawyer. My mother became a teacher, ultimately a preacher. And so those days we spent with our grandparents. Our grandmother from Sino, from this rural county, came to Monrovia and lived in our home the same way. Our grandmother from the county, the other rural county where my father was born, never did come to the city. But we were compelled, every time there was school closing, that we had to go back into the rural areas of my father's place, that we had to live there with the grandmother. We had to go to the farms with her, young children following them to the farms. We had to help with the chores. And so this is why today I still go back to the village where my grandmother lived, where we lived with her, where today I farm. So it was, for me, such a wonderful time of life. Young, but with parents that really not only loved you, but because they had spent time to educate themselves, their emphasis was on the education of their children to enable them to be self-sufficient. So I found those my happier days of my life. And the days when I just, I just love going back to both of the rural areas and just memorialize those early days with me and my siblings, just enjoy being with our grandparents. A changed country today, but those memories are still very strong with us.
Not just the memories, but also the actions. And now I can just see your grandparents, but must be also your grandmothers, in your words, and the connection to women in communities. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the stories your grandmothers may have told you as a child growing up, or perhaps some of the principles that you hold on to from a childhood that is really just rich and with so many different connections?
Well, I always believe that by our situation, by the diversity of our background, we bridged so many barriers. I could easily go into any setting and say, I believe I'm also a native. I believe I'm also indigenous because my father's 100%, my mother was 50%. But I could also say that we bridge also the divide of education, because even though they were both indigenous, they had the opportunity to learn under what was really a divided but elitist system. And so that provided the kind of determination. It probably carved my vision of where I should be. And the fact that our father was the first indigenous set the pace that you can be whatever you want to be if you're willing to apply your time and to be able to have the vision, the energy, and the determination. There was one part that created another aspect of my life that I think strengthened my character. Our father got ill. He had a stroke, and there were no medical facilities that could have helped him. And so he stayed ill for 7 years. And our mother then merely took care of him. We were still there. We were still going to school. Some of us were still now into high school. And I always tell people, I say, I know what it is to come from prosperity to poverty. Because when our father got ill, all of the attributes, all of the support, all he did fell away. And so our mother had to do what other mothers did. Make bread to sell, do things that other women did. But I think her strength in being able to provide that care and at the same time be able to coach her children, that they stayed focused on going to school, getting an education, preparing themselves. I think therein lies my own strength of character and my own ability to be able to forge ahead if I see that there's something that would improve not only me, but improve the society in which I live.
Extraordinary. Both your parents are extraordinary. Can we talk about a period in your life, a little later in your life, when you started to enter politics? There was a moment in 1985 when you criticized the military regime at the time, and it caused tumult in life. It was also a tumultuous time, and you had to leave the country. Could you talk about that period of time?
You see, if I may, Reeta, let me go a little bit back.
Yes.
I was one of the young people in our high school that always took action, always found some reason to challenge the teacher on certain things. And so I started to work very early because I had to. Our family were not rich. And so before we get to 85, I was asked to give a speech at the college that I graduated from, the high school. And that's when I started the criticism of government. That was in the 70s. And that criticism enabled me through a Harvard University advisory group to go and further my education, to go to school, to build upon the school I had had with my husband, my children's father, but to go back and get further education. After that, my life took a completely different trend. By the time we reached 85, I had been doing some work at the World Bank at a junior level. But I was called back, and I was called back to form a political party. And so I campaigned for the selected candidate of our party. And yes, criticized quite a bit the policies of government, as I did in my commencement speech way back in 1971. And ultimately, we were now in a military government. And again, I challenged the military government. That also led to problems. But what finally moved me was the fact that we were convinced that our candidate won the election. And that the process of counting the vote was stopped, and a new group was formed to be able to read the ballots. And clearly that group was a pro-military government group that we knew that it was fraudulent. And at that point, with my party, the leaders of my party decided we would not, even though I had won clearly a senatorial seat, we decided we would not honor a fraudulent elections and we would not serve. Well, obviously, that put me into a lot of trouble. I was haunted by security agents. I had to go into different places to sleep and hide and all of that. Ultimately, with support from friends outside, I was able to leave the country and to return to work at the bank. What does that say? It just says that that one finds themselves in those circumstances, and it brings you out based upon, your own personal commitment, your own determination, your own self-confidence in what you're doing. My confidence was that I could be what I wanted. I could take a position in accordance with what I felt was the right thing to do, and to be prepared to suffer the consequences of that.
And yet it took enormous courage, enormous personal courage to be able to do that, whether it was challenging that teacher or challenging the regime. Speak more about how you draw upon that courage and that resource.
I think it comes from basically my mother.
Mm.
My mother was a very religious person. And so in the difficulties she faced with our father's death and life, she became a preacher, Presbyterian church preacher. And so we all grew up with the belief that with God, you can conquer anything.
It also speaks to finding purpose, beyond courage, finding purpose and understanding what you're here to do. And it sounds like you had that sense, or you came into that sense of what you were here to do quite early, and it was tested.
Yes, Reeta. Once you start and you're very firm in a position you take, and you stay the course with what you believe in, it's just one step at a time. And that's something I always like to say to people. There's no catapulting into leadership roles. Sometimes you have to go the full way. You have to learn how to lose and accept losing as a part of character building.
Yes.
And I think my own experience suggests that I did have the experience of being strong in success or maintaining self-confidence in defeat.
Speak more about that process of coming to strength, even in a time when you're so challenged, and you speak of defeat, and yet it seems like it's also a moment of rebirth and renewal, and self-reflection and learning, and then going forward.
I think that guided me through my long life process because I was always looking for what are the lessons to learn when you reach an obstacle and that obstacle sort of stops you from your goal. How do you turn failure into success? So I always say to some of my friends, failure is just the upside down of success. All you need to do is to draw from all those experiences, recalibrate, restructure your own thinking and your own approaches, and then go again with self-confidence and determination. And I think that has carried me through all the points. Hasn't all been easy, but then, that's the good part about life. When you have a strong determination, you can face the obstacles very strongly and face yourself to it. Most times you win, but sometimes you lose.
That's so true, so true. How did your family rally around you?
Very much so. I think if there's any strength I have, it came from two sources. First of all, my family. Like I say, we have a close-knit family. And I think because we all had the same character traits, one of independence based upon how we were brought to do so because of what our families went through, and because of what we were representing, the bridge between two worlds, always able to be strengthened enough, to survive and go on. So I think that family was probably a strength. The other measure of my strength were women. When we talked about when I had to leave the country, I was in prison before, and it's women who collected hundreds of thousands of signatures all over the country, to appeal for my release from prison.
Mm-hmm.
And so women have always been a part of my life because my mother was a strong woman, and she and many other prominent women in the society, very religious, always having prayer meetings, to help to pray for the good of the country and pray for the survival in those difficult times when we had a military government. That just became me, a part of family, a part of the strength of women, a part of a very determined, resilient society that against all odds we're going to keep fighting, keep trying to move with all the difficulties we face.
You put your finger on the human spirit. It's also propelled by a sense of what's right, and that we never let the light go out around what's right. And that's something that's coming across really, really clearly. If we move along into your career when you were elected president, a historic moment, so being first woman president, not just of Liberia, but for the continent. That moment, that rallying moment, how did you feel just at that point when you understood you won the election, and then the responsibility that settled? I mean, I know you've always carried that sense of purpose, that accountability to serve. But I wondered how you gathered your strength, knowing what was also ahead, what you were inheriting.
Yes. Indeed, when I came into the presidency, I brought into the office a fair amount of experience from national public service and international public service. So I went in with a vision, but there was no playbook. So I didn't have all the steps written out where I could just do the check mark. And I was taking office after 2 decades of civil war and destruction of the country. And I was also taking office where many of those who had been warlords or been those who were perpetrators of the war were part of the new political setting. And so I had to work with them. I had to be able to be very clear in what I intended to achieve in the country. I had to put together the strongest team possible. And that meant recruiting some of our best minds who were serving abroad, particularly in the United States, encouraging them to come back to face it. And I believe also putting women, which was always been my focus, in those critical positions that are usually not those held by women, like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Commerce, those critical strategic positions, because I believe that the women who served in those ways were the ones more committed, more focused, more determined, and certainly with the best integrity as was required in the country. And so our party had its perspectives. We figured what we would do was to become, we hoped, a middle-income country by a certain period of time. We faced a lot of difficulties trying to achieve that. But what we did was to put in the fundamentals of economic reconstruction, infrastructure, revigoration, institutional independence. And so I believe that in my 12 years of service, we left the country so much better than we found it, and left it for the takeoff by the next administration.
There are many lessons just from everything you said from the beginning to where you left government. I want to go back to a few things because the world's so fractured right now. There are conflicts in many parts of the world, which we read about all the time. What does it take to make peace with foes, people who have committed great crimes, and yet recognize that they have to be part of this process of getting to peace. How does one come to that table?
If I may use my own experience as an example, I knew that there were many persons holding positions, some of it elective positions, in the country, in our government. I knew I had to be firm in saying that we respected the rights of people and that the rule of law would always be available to anyone who wanted to take advantage of it and to test it. But at the same time, to use sufficient influence in forging ahead with the right policies and the right decisions in such a way that you could be able to convert many of those who perhaps were not committed to the kind of peace that would enable the country to achieve its development goals. And sometimes that meant making compromises, being able to find a way where you can manage the tension in a country that's a post-conflict and a poor country facing a huge debt stock.
Yes.
How do you get people like in our legislature, which is our parliament, to be able to pass the right laws for the protection of women, promotion of women, but at the same time, to give the assurance to everybody that if you felt that your rights had been compromised, that you had a judicial system that was willing to hear you out in accordance with the rule of law. And I think that enabled me in those 12 years. Had we not faced a very difficult situation of Ebola, now that I think is when my own resolve was fully tested. Fully tested because it was a disease we did not know. Even though, reports say that a disease like that started in Democratic Republic of Congo many years ago, but we had never known about it. It was far away from our region. And the effects were so dynamic, so quickly in spreading across internal borders, people getting sick and falling so. But I believe that the character of taking charge and leading by example is probably where. So I chaired the meetings. I brought everybody together. We made mistakes. We did impose some militancy that led to a lot of people getting hurt. One even died. But quickly being able to find the measures in a crisis. What we did in this particular case, we just took the entire process of response into the hands of community leaders and made them responsible to detect the symptoms, to make the reports to the health authorities, to take charge in leading the responses. And I think that worked very well for us. So when at the end of the time when Ebola finally ended, I think it was well known that we were those that had really come across. But talking about the greatest challenge, we have a large Muslim population in our society. And they have a special way of handling death, a way of being able to bathe the dead, bathe the body and all of that. And so I had to make one major decision. And what that was to go against what our society had ever known, and that was cremation.
How did you broach on that subject?
One day, I had a meeting I called all the religious leaders and the Muslim leadership and told them that there was a choice. Either we're going to have more thousands of people die because of this process of handling the bodies, or we could save ourselves by ensuring that we did something that was unprecedented but most necessary for the sake of the nation. And I suppose that they saw my determination to carry it out. I think I was able to say to them in a very reassuring way that it may look bad to you today, but it'll be better for you tomorrow. Maybe I was lucky.
I think you were also wise and courageous, and also bringing them to in just right then. That example to talk about transcending boundaries. It's about bringing science and faith, public health, all in one go to save lives. You mentioned something so astonishing about leadership. Talked about leading by example, finding people of integrity, in that way of finding people from communities to take charge, basically distributing power, devolving decision-making, enabling agency at the grassroots. And you also spoke about putting women who had integrity, but who also could take charge into perhaps what would have been seen as unconventional roles in government and in high office. What were the qualities you looked for, even when you were looking to find the best minds and the best people? What did you look for?
Those who demonstrated the ethics of work.
The ethics of work.
Yeah. In such a way that they propel themselves to go forward. You could see it not only in their profile, not only in their remarks, their statements, but in the promotion that they achieved. Competing with others, but excelling on a basis of effort as a woman. And that to me was very important. I mean, these were women who excelled, were promoted because of performance, because of their dedication, and their integrity. Integrity to the sense of making those hard decisions that even made them unpopular.
And yet they were willing to go there.
They were willing to go there. And I think that's something I too stood by. That if I have a decision, by the cremation decision, if it's the right thing, I'll stand by it, and I'm prepared to suffer the consequences of it. And most times, if you're doing the right thing, you will find that it's convincing to others that not only did you do the right thing, but you stood by it against any view that this will be used against you to make you unpopular.
It's a rare quality in politics today. Absolutely rare quality.
But it's there in so many places.
How do we find that? And how do we put a light on that type of courage and that type of integrity?
Let me use Africa as an example. Although I have many, women leaders in other countries that I admire so much, and I think some of my strength is drawn from their experience and my learning about what they have done, to make a difference in their societies. But in my societies, I take it back from a native woman chief who took the decision in those early days of our nation to open up the society to foreign investment. And that's how you hear Liberia is a big rubber country. because of Firestone and the long years of Firestone, having a major rubber plantation in Liberia. But I take in the fact that against all the objection to bringing strangers on your land and taking your land, and she stood against it, and she prevailed.
This is wonderful. I think it brings us very nicely as well to the work of your center and the work that you're seeking to achieve by just bringing up women's leadership. Talk about what you see as sort of the strong drivers that will ensure we have women across multiple sectors, not just in high office in politics, but also women who are leading in business, women who are leading in civil society, and how they can ensure not just a strong vision, but really strong contribution to building communities, building countries.
I am committed to working with those institutions that are working for gender equity, that are working for equality and a better position for women at all levels in leadership positions. My center has a strategic poles. One is to identify those women who have already committed themselves to public service, have already achieved a certain level of leadership in their society, but is prevented from going any further simply because they are women. That they have equal education, equal commitment, equal knowledge, but the society has not reached a place to recognize them as equals. We intend to be a part of movements, not only in Africa, but movements across, that will see us with a wave of women ready through knowledge, through effort and experience and performance, ready to take any position, leadership position at higher levels. And we do not think that we are asking for any giveaways. This is women who are prepared to be competitive, to winning on a basis of self-effort, on a basis of their whole performance on merit. It's a tough one. If you listen to the reports and the predictions, they say it would take 130 years before you see gender equity in the world. Well, we don't stand by those predictions.
We're just forging ahead. That's right. We're just forging ahead. When you won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011, that's in so many ways is just a global recognition of your contributions, your contribution of character, your contributions of leadership, contributions to the country. How is that recognition, the Nobel Prize, a resource to call on in terms of holding the light up for good leadership, but also for women's leadership?
I think I see this as, such an honor and recognition, and one that reinforces my own commitment to work for conditions of peace. That's what the Peace Prize was all about. And that means sometimes taking risk to intervene in issues in countries where women's rights, are abused. It also gives responsibility if you a Nobel laureate, because you're expected to not only to perform in such a way that that high honor, is continues to be respected, but also that you did not end your commitment in a promotion of peace.
President Dolan, when you were called on to intervene or to come into a room where there has been conflict between parties, leaders, how do you prepare yourself for entering that conversation? What do you look for in those parties to know how to begin even the conversation?
I believe you need to understand the society and the environment in which you are going to intervene. And that takes time to do as much reading as you can. And you research. All of that helps. But I think it's what you bring to it because of yourself and what you stand for and how you are regarded by your own life example, so that when you speak on an intervention, you speak with a consciousness of self-effort. There are times when also one knows when to push and when to stop. Using evidences and examples always help. And demonstrating that you have changed things by influence, not by power. And if one uses their own self-example as a means of resolving conflict or trying to manage tensions and expectations in societies, I think most times people look back at what you've achieved, what you've done, how you have handled it, what you stand for. I think you bring an authority of your own example, an authority of your presence, but at the same time, not to go bullying things, but using the influence of what's right, what's wrong, how you, the one who's part of the problem, can be a part of the solution.
Yes. In one example, you've spoken about not just self-awareness, but leading by example, but also that example conveying credibility, trust, of wanting to do the right thing and finding the right path. It's a very, very powerful example. And I think about what's happening in the world today, what's happening on our continent of Africa. There's so many lessons that can be drawn by your words. Let's talk about the young people across this amazing continent who are also seeking their path of leadership, and whether they're working in community projects in their hometown or village, whether they are innovators and creating interesting businesses to solve problems, or whether they're entering a life which will be a life of public service. There's so much energy and there's so much desire and aspiration to contribute. When you look out and think about all these young people, especially young women, What do you advise them about finding their path and sticking to it?
I think all leaders of the world are increasingly recognizing that the future of our world lies with the young people. Not only because of their numbers, but because of the abilities that they are getting, being technologically savvy with what they do, getting much education and knowledge as they can, and making demands that we cannot have a world that does not recognize this coming generation that is ready for leadership. Unless we are able to accord them the opportunities that they need to be able to build their own capabilities, to receive as much support for the knowledge that they need and that they demand, so that they have the right and full capacity to be able to be a full participant, even at a time when they're not fully in leadership positions, but are very conscious of the role that they will have to play, and that only we can give them that opportunity to be prepared to fill that role properly in the interests of their country and in the interests of the world. It's a new world. It's a young world.
It is a new world, a young world, and your words speak to the heart of the work of the Mastercard Foundation to prepare young people for a life of leadership, a life of service, a life of contributing, and to be able to exercise their voice, their agency, and to make a difference. And you're right, the continent is very young. It's getting younger in some ways, but soon most of the young people, the world's workforce, will come from Africa. You're a leader who participates at so many forums, and you lead at a global level, elevating the role the continent and continent's young people can play to solving global problems. And I think right now, we've gone through Ebola, as you spoke about. We've gone through a global pandemic, where young people also exercise and demonstrated leadership in bringing communities together and keeping the communities safe. And probably right now, the greatest existential threat that we face is climate change. And young people want to be engaged. Talk more about how we can sort of lift up not just their voices, but really showcase the solutions that many young people are going to be bringing forward, already are working on across Africa, and serve that up at a global level.
The first thing I know the young people would like to see is Africa takes charge of its own destiny. And by so doing, use our natural resources in the best way for the development of the country. In a world today as confused as it is perceived to be, unless we can find the way where our young Africans coming into leadership can, through their collective action, make Africa the continent of the future. By being able to find the common voices across countries, being able to identify those priorities that are good for Africa, but still good for the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And being the champion for bringing back the global cooperation that we have seen in days past. And that would mean, again, with Africa's strong collective leadership, we can try to break through this major political warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And see if we can get back to those days when multilateralism was effective. And I think only an Africa that binds itself together, because we've got much diversity in Africa. But if in that diversity we can find common strengths and then have common purpose, not only for our development, but for being able to part of the championing for a better world. It may sound like a dream. We need dreams. But you know, there's always dreams that can be made realities.
Well, first of all, President Ellen, we are so proud and so grateful that you serve on the board of the Mastercard Foundation. Your leadership, your voice at that critical time when the world faced this incredible threat, which we didn't even understand. Today we understand the coronavirus much more. We understand what it took to fight COVID. But at that moment, your voice mattered so much that helped propel us to take the right action and to partner with the Africa CBC. It's just so many lessons. But more importantly, when I think about the work going forward, there's so much more that we have to do to build the workforce, to build leadership, to enable entrepreneurs to access opportunities, not just financing, but markets and networks, so that the continent can flourish. Because if the continent flourishes, the world flourishes.
And I applaud the work on the promotion of women. I'll come back to that.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think that is clearly what is now required to be able to move at a faster pace. The contribution of women to economic development, contribution to peace and security, to a better world, less wars, less conflict, more compromising. I think that's what women bring to leadership in the continent and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And until we can get enough of those women in those places, we cannot achieve. Statistics also show what this will do to the GDP, of all the countries by the contribution of women going beyond. But just think of what it will bring in societies like our own, which are predominantly depend upon the work of women on the farms, women in the markets. But going beyond that, women leadership.
That's powerful. Thank you so much, President Ellen. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for contributing, for sharing, and for leading all of us. You are an absolute inspiration. Thank you. Thank you so much. From homemaker to Nobel laureate, from leading a nation to impacting the world and generations. Even from an early age, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was a change agent. She was already breaking barriers. She is a phenomenal example of transcending boundaries.